Some women stay silent until silence becomes a weapon sharper than any scream. Margaret stood at the edge of her garden fingers, clutching a chipped porcelain teacup. The morning sun spilled across the grass like a spotlight on a stage she no longer owned. Her feet were bare, aching slightly against the dew-soaked soil, but she didn't move. Not when the door to her own house clicked shut behind her. Not even when she heard her daughter-in-law's voice, sharp, triumphant, ring out from inside. "You should have left gracefully, Margaret. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The words echoed like a slap. Imagine this, a woman who spent her life cultivating warmth, quiet, steady, unthanked warmth, who folded her grief like linens in the drawer and served smiles with the morning coffee, who held her tongue when her son chose a woman that reeked of vanity and veiled contempt, who stepped aside in her own home, shrinking because she was told you had your turn. And now she was standing outside, locked out, banished. But here's what they didn't know. The woman they'd just thrown out had not been broken. She had been watching. Inside Camilla, the self-anointed queen of the house glided through the living room like she had finally exorcised a ghost. Her long silk robe trailed behind her as she sipped oat milk from a glass Margaret once drank from every morning. Her laughter was brittle but loud. She was already on the phone with a friend. She actually cried. Can you believe it? Cried, standing in the garden like a character in a sad film. Honestly, I was doing her a favor. The house was too much for her. It's time for new energy. Power. That's what Camilla worshipped. She believed she had it now. After all, the son James had been reduced to a nodding, smiling shell of himself. The man Margaret had raised with gentle discipline and quiet pride was now barely a shadow, tamed, compliant, always seeking peace at any cost. Maybe you've seen this before. The golden son who folds under the weight of a woman who knows how to twist guilt into shackles. The daughter-in-law who weaponizes youth and modernity against the very woman who made her life of comfort possible. The old story where the quiet mother becomes an inconvenience in her own castle. But this time the ending would be different. Because Margaret had secrets. She turned away from the garden slowly, the teacup still in her hand. There was no bitterness on her face, only a strange calm, like a storm cloud just before lightning kisses the earth. She walked barefoot down the stone path, not toward the street, but to a place behind the garage, a locked shed. No one had entered it in years, not even James. As her fingers turned the rusty key in the old lock, something shifted in her eyes. She wasn't crying anymore. Because while Camilla had been redecorating and posturing and playing Queen Margaret, had been quietly tending to something far more powerful than appearances. Ownership. You see, Margaret wasn't just the woman who used to cook in that kitchen or fold towels in that bathroom. She was the legal owner of the house. Every tile, every window pane, every rosebush in the garden hers. She'd inherited it from her mother, paid the taxes, kept the deed in a safety deposit box no one remembered. Not even James. And months ago, when Camilla's subtle cruelties grew bolder when she started referring to our house and leaving Margaret off dinner invites, Margaret had sensed what was coming. So she'd made changes, quietly, legally. Changes Camilla hadn't even considered. She pulled out the file from the old lockbox. It was thick. Not just the deed, but everything. The papers that showed the trust, the revised will. A recent transfer of financial power that James had signed without question, believing it was just another of his mother's routine banking chores. And now Margaret was holding the key to everything Camilla believed she owned. But she didn't rush back. No, that's not how women like Margaret retaliate. Not with rage or screams or broken glass, but with silence that makes the air colder. With a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. With a letter sent by courier. With a phone call to a lawyer who once said to her, "Mrs. Whitmore, if anyone ever tries to muscle you out, just call me." So while Camilla danced in her illusion of victory, Margaret stood in the shed, the papers resting on her lap, and thought, let her believe it. Let her taste the victory. Let her redecorate. Let her throw a party. Because when the truth comes, it won't knock. It'll walk in through the front door and ask who the hell she thinks she is. 2 days passed. Margaret didn't call, didn't text, didn't plead. She stayed with her sister on the other side of town in a modest house with creaky floorboards and floral curtains that hadn't changed since 1994. There was something strangely soothing about the smell of peppermint and mothballs. Her sister Helen didn't ask questions, just handed her a cup of chamomile and said, "Told you that girl had knives behind her teeth." Margaret didn't argue. She just smiled faintly, her fingers tightening around the mug. You see, some wounds aren't visible. They don't bruise. They hum low steady, like a violin string stretched too tight. Camilla had stretched it. Inside the house she now thought was hers. Camilla's reign began in earnest. The rugs were replaced. Margaret's antique cabinet, a family heirloom, was pushed into the garage. The photos of James and Margaret on the staircase wall were boxed and stacked like clutter. In their place went sleek, abstract art, all sharp angles and aggressive colors. She even replaced the curtains in the dining room because they smelled like old people. But the energy in the house shifted. James came home later each night. Silent. He noticed things but said nothing. That was always his curse. He mistook silence for peace conflict, avoidance for kindness. So when Camilla smiled at him and said, "Isn't it lovely not having your mother breathing down our necks?" he just nodded, lips pressed tight. But at night he'd find himself standing in the hallway, looking at the empty nail holes where family photos used to hang. There was a weight in the air, a heaviness that no candle or essential oil diffuser could dispel. That's what happens when you exile the heart of a house. Camilla didn't see it. She thought she'd won. But have you ever noticed how people who obsess over control never see the storm until it's directly above them? It started with a knock at the door, 3 days after Margaret had been thrown out. A courier, dressed in black, professional, impassive. Camilla opened the door, barefoot coffee in hand, mildly annoyed. "Yes, delivery for Mrs. Margaret Whitmore." She blinked. "She doesn't live here anymore." The courier didn't flinch. "It's addressed to the property, not the resident. I just need a signature." Camilla scribbled her name still half asleep and shut the door with her hip. The envelope was thick, sealed with a golden emblem. Curiosity is a drug for women like her. She opened it right there in the foyer, and the moment her eyes scanned the words, "Ownership transfer notification," her coffee cup dropped, shattered on the floor. Inside were several documents, a formal revocation of residential permission for any non-invited party, a cease and desist for unauthorized modifications to the property, and most importantly, a notice of reactivation of trust control over the estate, with Margaret listed as sole trustee. Camilla's face drained of color, her breath caught in her throat. But the pièce de résistance, a handwritten note, "Dear Camilla, I do hope the new curtains are to your taste. Unfortunately, the house will need to be restored to its original condition per preservation clauses you may have overlooked. You'll find the schedule for your departure included. Kindly vacate within 10 business days. Warm regards, Margaret." For a moment, Camilla laughed, a brittle, desperate sound. No, this can't be legal. But it was. Oh, it was. James came home that evening to find her pacing hair-frizzy papers scattered across the dining table. She shoved the documents at him. "Did you know about this? Tell me this is a joke. Tell me your mother doesn't own the house." He looked down at this paperwork, and something shifted in his face. A recognition, a memory, a document he'd signed months ago at his mother's request, trusting her as he always had. She'd told him it was just about estate simplification. He hadn't even read it. James sat down slowly, pressing his fingers to his temples. "She warned me, you know, that one day you'd go too far." Camilla's jaw dropped. "Are you taking her side?" "No," he said quietly. "I'm finally realizing I never should have left it." Camilla screamed, a full guttural animal scream, the kind of sound a person makes when the mask slips and they know the game is up. She had tried to exile a queen, but the queen owned the board. The next morning Margaret returned, not with police, not with shouting, not with vengeance painted on her lips. She arrived alone, a gray coat draped over her shoulders, her hair pinned back, simple, elegant, a quiet force. She didn't knock. She used her key. Camilla was still in bed. The hangover from her own panic hadn't faded, and she'd barely slept. The moment she heard the click of the front door unlocking, she flew down the stairs in a frenzy robe, flying heart-thudding in her ears. "What are you doing here?" Margaret didn't respond at first. She walked through the house slowly, taking it in. The new rug, the missing photos, the smell of clashing perfumes and synthetic candles. "Where's the cabinet that was here?" she asked softly, pointing to the blank spot by the window. Camilla was trembling. "You have no right." Margaret turned her gaze like still water hiding an undertow. "Don't I?" There it was again, that unbearable calm, that unnerving, unbothered tone. It stripped the power right out of Camilla's voice. "James hasn't spoken to you, has he?" Margaret said, not cruelly, but with a hint of something ancient, something older than both of them. "He'll be here soon." Camilla's face twisted. "You don't get to do this. You're just some old woman who couldn't let go." Margaret's eyes didn't blink. And you're a scared little girl who thought power came from possession. You thought if you erased me, the house would be yours, but you forgot something. She stepped closer now, each word more precise than a scalpel. This house has memory, and memory doesn't bow to entitlement. Camilla opened her mouth to shout to claw back control, but footsteps echoed from outside. James had arrived. He walked in slowly, his face drawn, the weight of years settling on his shoulders. He looked at Camilla, then at his mother, and in that moment his silence spoke volumes. Camilla rushed to him. "Tell her, James. Tell her she can't just walk in and—" But he raised his hand, not to silence her with force, but with decision. "I read everything," he said quietly. "The deed, the trust, the preservation clause. You shouldn't have touched anything." Camilla's mouth fell open. "You're defending her. She manipulated you." "No," he cut in. "She protected me. She protected all of us from what we didn't see coming, from what I refused to see." His voice cracked slightly. "I let you humiliate her. I let you turn our home into something hollow. And I stood there because I thought avoiding the storm would keep the peace." He looked at his mother now, his eyes damp. "I'm sorry." Margaret gave him a small nod. No tears, no trembling. Because this wasn't the moment she'd waited for. She hadn't needed James to choose. She'd already chosen herself. Camilla backed away slowly, hands shaking. "You can't make me leave. You'll regret this." Margaret stepped past her, calm as sunrise. "Regret is what got us here. What you're feeling now, that cold weight in your chest, that's not fear. That's the absence of control." Camilla stared speechless. "You never had power here," Margaret said softly. "Only presence. And now even that is gone." 10 days later, Camilla was gone. She left in a storm of curses and boxes, her pride heavier than any luggage. No one came to help her move. No friends, no family, not even James. She was left to carry the weight of her own undoing. The rugs were rolled up, the cheap art taken down. The photographs went back on the staircase wall, each one placed gently by Margaret's own hand. The cabinet returned to its rightful spot. And the house, it breathed again. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but with the slow exhale of a storm having passed. People think revenge is loud, but the most devastating retribution comes dressed in silence, served cold by the hands of the underestimated. Margaret stood by the window that night, sipping tea from her favorite porcelain cup, the one Camilla had nearly discarded. And when James asked her what she planned to do next, she smiled. "Live," she said, "on my terms, as I should have all along." Because when a woman stops waiting for permission, the world shifts. Weeks passed. The house settled back into itself, not into the past, but into something stronger, grounded, quiet, real. It no longer echoed with tension or clipped footsteps pretending confidence. It didn't reek of artificial scents or shallow modern decor. Instead, it smelled like cinnamon again. Old wood, open windows. Margaret didn't rush to repaint the walls or undo everything Camilla had done. She left some things as they were, just slightly altered. The cold steel chandelier was softened by warm bulbs. The rigid modern chairs were draped with knit throws. The hard corners of Camilla's rule were being smoothed, not erased. Because Margaret wasn't trying to go back. She was reclaiming forward. James came by more often now, not as a son making amends, but as a man learning how to listen. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes just silence. They'd sit on the porch and watch the birds, and he'd ask questions he never asked growing up. "What was it like for you after Dad died?" Margaret would smile, gaze distant, like trying to hold up a roof during a hurricane with your bare hands and pretending to everyone else that the storm wasn't even there. You see, most people only notice women like Margaret after the collapse, after the outburst, after the revenge. But her strength had never been about noise. It had always been in the way she carried on while bleeding, in the way she let herself be underestimated, even dismissed, because she didn't need to prove anything. Until they tried to take what she built. Camilla tried to reach out once, one last message sent through James, not daring to contact Margaret directly. "She says she wants to apologize," James said carefully one evening. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "She wants what?" Her voice held no malice, just quiet disbelief. "She says she didn't realize how much the house meant to you, that she was under stress, that she took it out on the wrong person." Margaret stirred her tea slowly. Her fingers paused at the rim of the cup. "Do you believe her?" James hesitated. "I think she believes herself." In that moment, she nodded once, a slow, thoughtful movement. "Tell her I accept the apology, but she doesn't need to come back to deliver it." He looked at her, brows furrowed. "You don't want to say anything else?" "No," she said, her voice firm now. "I already said everything I needed to, the day I walked back through that door. Because the truth is, not all closure needs a confrontation. Not all healing requires a spectacle. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not invite them back in. Margaret didn't rebuild her life in fire and fury. She rebuilt it with grace, with long walks, with late-night books and homemade soup, with laughter from neighbors she hadn't seen in years, now stopping by again saying things like, "It's good to see you back, Margaret. We missed your light." She joined a pottery class. She planted new herbs. She repainted the upstairs room, the one Camilla had claimed as a wellness studio, and turned it into a writing nook instead. For herself. For the thoughts she'd kept shelved for decades. For the letters she wrote to no one and everyone. And once a week she visited the small local library to meet with 3 other women, older, quiet, overlooked women. They'd swap stories, some sad, some funny, some terrifyingly similar. One day one of them said, "You always seem so calm, Margaret, like nothing could break you." Margaret smiled. "Oh, I break," she said, "but I've learned to break into myself, not away from it. And isn't that the difference? Some people crack and leak rage, others crack and find their core." She never told them the whole story. Not yet. She didn't need to. But sometimes, when she passed her reflection in the hallway mirror, the one Camilla had once deemed outdated, she'd stop, meet her own eyes, and whisper softly, "You didn't just survive, you endured with dignity." Because dignity is the one thing no one can take from you, not even when they take your home, your place, your name from the mailbox. And when they try, you don't scream. You sign the papers. You call the lawyer. You unlock the door with the original key and walk in like you never left, because in truth, you never did. A year later, the house stood more alive than ever. Not louder, not flashier, but real. Weathered wood, soft lamplight, a garden with wild lavender stretching unapologetically toward the sky. It no longer looked like something curated for Instagram. It looked like something lived in. And Margaret, she no longer flinched at memories. She let them visit sometimes, unexpectedly, like old friends who'd left without goodbye. She didn't push them away. She let the pain pass through her like wind through open curtains. Because that's what healing is, not erasure, but permission to remember without drowning. James had changed too, subtly. He spoke slower now, chose his words with care. Once frantic to please, now more grounded. They weren't back to how they'd been before Camilla, but they were building something honest. "You know," he said one afternoon, helping her prune the rose bushes, "I used to think you were weak for not speaking up, for not fighting." Margaret tilted her head, hands still in the soil. "And now," he shrugged, a sad smile on his face, "now I think I was scared. Scared of what would happen if I admitted you were right." She didn't gloat, didn't preach. She simply said, sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is wait. Not because they're passive, but because they know the storm isn't ready yet. He looked at her like he was seeing his mother for the first time, not just as the woman who raised him, but as the woman he'd overlooked. And Camilla, word was she'd moved to a sleek condo uptown, alone. Her social circle had shrunk mysteriously. People noticed things like how fast she moved on, how quickly she'd discarded Margaret, how quickly she herself had been discarded. Reputation doesn't shatter overnight. It fractures quietly, piece by piece. She tried to rebrand, posted inspirational quotes online, spoke of growth and toxic elders who held back her light. But behind the filters, the truth leaked. You see, people don't forget how you treat the woman who gave you shelter, especially when she lets you destroy yourself with your own ambition. Margaret never spoke ill of her, not once, because she didn't need to. Camilla's downfall was rooted in the very thing she thought gave her power, her ability to manipulate, charm, dominate. But control built on dismissal is as fragile as glass, and the moment it cracks, it cuts the one who held it. Months after her departure, a legal letter arrived at Margaret's door, a quiet request from Camilla's lawyer. She wanted to retrieve a few personal items she had left behind, cosmetics, a few expensive blouses, and absurdly a bottle of artisanal olive oil she claimed was emotionally significant. Margaret didn't laugh. She simply boxed them neatly, carefully. No bitterness, just precision. She wrapped the items in linen, placed the box at the edge of the driveway, and left a small card on top. "Here's what was yours. What mattered you left behind, M." She never heard back. But she didn't need to, because true power isn't loud. It's not slamming doors or shouting in foyers. It's not stripping walls of portraits or tossing heirlooms into boxes. True power is quiet. It's earned. And when it returns to you, it doesn't ask for applause. It simply is. Margaret began hosting Sunday teas again, not as a performance, but as a gathering. Women came from the neighborhood, some old friends, some newer, some who had whispered behind her back when Camilla wore the crown. Now they watched her pour tea, speak calmly, laugh with a softness that demanded attention more than any tantrum ever could. And one day, as she stood in the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron, one of them asked, "Do you ever miss her?" She paused. "Not from pain, from honesty. I miss the woman I hoped she'd become," she said, "but not the woman she chose to be." The room went still, and then they nodded, because every woman in that room had known one, a Camilla, maybe a daughter-in-law, a sibling, a boss, a friend, a stranger, someone who mistook kindness for weakness and silence for surrender. But not Margaret. Not anymore. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.